proper started when Blair and I came in both won the elections in '97. Our commitment was that he'd go to the north, I'd try and get Sinn Féin to convince the IRA to go back into the ceasefire, because the ceasefires had broken down in the Canary Wharf and the big bombs in Manchester and elsewhere. Police were being shot again in the north. So our trick, as far as it was a trick, was to try and move quickly, get the ceasefires reinstated and move quickly to the talks. So the talks started in September '97, and then it went on right through. But at the Paisley walked out of the talks at the very start. You can forget now, he never actually came back to it. We got him back years later, long after the Good Friday Agreement, back when we did the talks in Scotland later on. But then the Unionists were trying to go whether they'd walk out. And the only reason that we succeeded in getting off the ground at all was because David Eoghan, who was shown in the shot there, who's a great guy, there's a new film out on him, which I saw part of the foreign trailers the other day, probably seen it, and Gary McMichael, who was in the UDP, whose father had been shot by the IRA, that they stayed in and they walked back into the talks with David Trimble. If they had not have done that, we were gone before we started. So I was always very grateful to both the UDP and the PUP. And then the talks started, but then Trimble was under pressure, so Trimble wouldn't talk to Sinn Féin. He never talked to Sinn Féin. I mean, at that stage, they would only talk through the chair. And so there was no dialogue between them. And as you remember, in those days, they didn't talk to each other even in the corridors. The only time they were ever actually happy is when they had reason to confront each other and they could insult each other. They always got a great kick out of that. And Blair and I never quite understood why they were so happy when they were insulting each other. We were exhausted trying to keep them from doing it. But anyway, so it was always tension, and it never really changed. And one of the interesting things throughout the talks as Good Friday Agreement, I've been involved in a lot of conflict since, but the amount of times that with everybody in the room were only a handful, for the reason that you couldn't.
You couldn't do it, because everybody shouting back and forward.
You couldn't, all the time it was going back and forward, because if you put them all in the room, it was a recipe for disaster. I think probably maybe about 3 times with everybody in the room, and it was usually choreographed, so it would be a very short meeting. So that last meeting, which is famous in film, that was really the only meeting where we had everybody in the room and all the advisors. So it was a strange, but after 30 years of conflict, maybe after hundreds of years of conflict, maybe that's understandable, but it was difficult.